back again. Welcome to the I Influence podcast series, Tips, where we have a goal to amplify the voices and brands of today's most prolific influencers all around the world. I'm your host, Andrew McGee, and the founder and CEO of I Influence. This is episode 7, where we're joined by the artist himself, the homie, my brother, Baron Batch, man. So what's up, bro? How are you? How you feeling? Thank you for joining us. How are things, man? How you feeling?
Feeling rested. I just woke up from a nap.
Okay.
Yeah.
I love it. I was never able to really nap so much, but anytime I can get one, I love it.
Yeah.
But yeah, again, man, thank you. We're just gonna do a quick intro and then we'll hop straight in. So Baron Batch is a former running back at Texas Tech, where he finished his collegiate career as the school's 8th ranked all-time leader in rushing, and went on to get actually drafted by the Pittsburgh Steelers, where he played a number of years. Now he's nationally known as an artist based out of Pittsburgh, known for his famous art style, Pop X, which is a mix of pop art and expressionism, reminiscent of street art styles developed way back in the 70s and 80s. Baron was the founder and creative director of an event space, art gallery, and creative agency called Studio AM, where he and other creatives were able to collaborate. He has had multiple art studios and ventures, including being the former owner of a creator of Angry Man Salsa, which was delicious, by the way. A high-end dipping salsa that was available online. Baron is known and labeled as the artist, which kind of changed his background as being known as the football player. Baron was described as a creative force in World Magazine, and his artwork is a major staple of the city of Pittsburgh. He's been chosen as a featured artist in multiple different festivals, events, art shows, and has forged partnerships all over the world that display his artwork in various facilities and spaces. So we're just gonna jump right in, man. And so, you and I, we kind of met during our time playing collegiate football, right? So it's we both had our journeys. Me from Oklahoma State, you from Texas Tech, and that's when we met. But nowadays, and actually, you went to play for the Pittsburgh Steelers, so you have that level of experience in playing, at a very high level. But so now you're an entrepreneur and an artist, and as an athlete turned entrepreneur and artist, I've seen you in action. I've been there in your studio where you were creating art from scratch. That was a very important time in my life, man, and so I appreciate you including me in that process. But can you share with the listeners kind of what your process of creating art is?
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me. I guess over the journey of making art, I guess that answer would be an evolving one. So, and it's funny because like I find myself now in this season of art making that is very non-process driven, I guess. I think like when I started out, you you don't know a lot, and you also just don't know like all the things that you wouldn't even assume are something that you're gonna end up finding out. So there's just like a lot that is there, and then you start down this path, and then I think eventually you come to a point where you do have a method of being able to produce work and lean on. And then it's funny because I think that also becomes like a limitation in a way. And so I'm very much in a phase of kind of my third time probably like breaking out of like what I thought would have been a process. And I've just learned that that's very much, at least my way, it's like, that's my preferred aesthetic of like making art, which is just letting discovery and evolution and growth happen of like what the work is. And not trying to be forceful about it. And I've been really fortunate to have been able to get in a I guess in a position or be in a position as an artist to really get to make the work that I want to make, and and make it at the pace that feels right. Because there definitely is like this phase when like you're getting traction, and it's almost like what you're creating almost like takes this hold over the direction you can go, and is like, all right, now you got to keep making me because this is what people are asking for. And it's and those are just honest conversations with yourself about, just like what you do, and I guess not really what you want to do or what you don't want to do, but really like what you're enthusiastic about, like working on. And the honest truth is sometimes I'm just enthusiastic about like not working at all, and that's part of it. And it's taken me a while to like unlearn, I guess like the hustle mentality.
Right.
And like just like come to grips with like, no, like it's important to rest. It's important to just go practice other things. Or like have fun playing around with other types of like mediums without the intention of trying to like do something with it other than just have that experience. So I got like a keyboard in here, I got a saxophone, I got some drums, I got some different musical instruments. I'm getting a kiln, I have a bow and arrow. It's like all the things. It's like, it's funny because it's almost like, it's like give yourself the things that you thought would be the coolest things to have as a kid. Not because as a kid you're like, I want to be a sweet saxophonist, or like it's just like, no, that would be cool to play with, essentially. So it's like figuring out how to like give yourself the proper toys to keep the experience playful, because like as much as at one point, man, if I could just only get to do this full time, like once you get there, it's like, all right, you got all, like, how are you going to fill that? How are you going to fill that time? What are you going to do with it, really?
And you mentioned playfulness, man, I love how you mentioned that, because I think that is something that adults in general need to be able to do more of, is just find this playful mentality. I am like inevitably, like I have to find it, and I have to make myself find it. It's a process, because now I have a son, and all he wants to do is play.
It's hard because like so much of like, especially like I think like culturally how we're taught that like playfulness exists is in like this like competitive sphere, and like that's not what it is. Like, like that's not it at all. I mean, you're like if you remember when you're a kid out on a playground, you're playing like tag. You're not playing tag to like defeat the person or like you're just playing. That's all there is. There's not like this competitive layer that goes over it. And I think that's, I mean, at least for me, that's something I've had to, I continually have to unlearn when it is unnecessary, and create an environment where it's much more unnecessary than not.
Right. Yeah, and you mentioned like transitioning from this like hustle mentality, and like we know about this world because we were both athletes, and so I'm curious to know, like, with your mindset now, like what was that transition like from like shifting that direction of your mindset of saying like, I gotta hustle, compete, be the best, be the best, and then now to this kind of mindset, which I think it's a transformation in a sense. You know, like what was that process with you, like just transitioning from that hustle mentality of being in the NFL? Because you know you are already in the 1% of athletes, you know, in the world, you know, and so you had to shine, you had to compete, and then now you have, I won't say found this passion. You're in the middle of a calling, essentially, of being an artist. What was that transition like for you to kind of shift that mindset a little bit?
Well, kind of jumping back to the first question you asked when you were talking about process, to completely kind of like encapsulate what I was getting at there is that um, I don't think of any of this as like a creative process. I think of it as like a creative practice. It's
Yeah,
a way of participating in the relationship that like I have with life in the moments that I'm able to experience them.
right.
So I think from that, to the question that you just asked, like what was that transition like? It also just became a practice.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah,
you recognize these things that aren't helpful, that are habits that in one environment, you know, helps you thrive, and now in another environment, they're holding you back.
mm-hmm.
And even the idea of, okay, like I'm like transitioning through this season and going into and there's this other place I need to go, um, is uh, is a very unhelpful one, because in the way that it has been in my experience is like you are always in the state of being able to practice what you can practice.
Yeah, yeah,
And so I don't even know if I'd even really say like there's necessarily been like some transition. It's just like
yeah,
I've been practicing the things that I can be honest with myself about, that
right, right.
um that that are are calling for that to happen. And
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think
yeah,
is like people, we all know what those are. I think this is one of the one of the functions of discomfort and
mm-hmm.
suffering. You
Yeah,
know, like
yeah,
we recognize these things, and um they're like invitations to participate in a way that brings us into just a more like potent relationship with what's happening.
yeah, yeah,
So yeah, uh there's definitely things like being, and I'll just talk about some of these things. It's fun to be able to
mm-hmm.
like be aware of them now, and also not be like, oh, but I'm so different, but to just be like, oh, like, and it's not, it hasn't been about like necessarily trying to change habits, but recognizing what the fruit of being aware of those habits looks like, and
Yeah,
being able to be like, oh, but I'm gonna like choose this fruit over here because like I this is now my preferred aesthetic. Like
yeah,
I'm not trying to just not do this because like this is not the right way to do it. It's like, no, this is like I prefer it this way.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I guess like in the midst of that, um, all the growth and transformation that can happen, that happens. But yeah, like going from a very just a very competitive person, um, that prioritized my efforts more than my ability to allow good things to happen for myself,
mm-hmm.
like was something that I've it's been a really wonderful um practice to see that aesthetic change.
Yeah,
Because yeah,
yeah,
it used to be like I have to make this happen.
mm-hmm.
This is the way that it needs to be. So all right, I'm gonna just like work as hard as I can to like make it that way.
Yeah,
And um that that's a way to do it. Like, you know, like that, certainly you could do it that way, but when you do it that way, it exists exactly in that way. Like, you have to work so hard to do that. That's how that exists. It's like the thing
like
that you're, so it's like the thing that, you know, that you're, now if you love working like that and grinding like that and really truly love it, and it's nourishing you and you're healthy that way, and like beautiful, and you're kind and awesome to everybody that you meet, and like you're fruitful that way, it's like that could be your preferred aesthetic. Like, I'm not saying there's one way or the other. I'm just saying, like, my preferred aesthetic shifted, and I learned that, like, you know, I can prepare and practice and also allow things to exist in a way that it doesn't create like tension and friction. And one of the big lessons that I kind of I continually see in that is it's the difference of putting your head down and being like, I'm going to make this happen, as opposed to being able to just like ask for help. And maybe have somebody who just has that something that you need, like, just, oh yeah, totally. And it's just like, and just being able to like be aware of that and see that, and to be able to be aware of what makes sense to ask for. So, that's been a big one. And I guess another as an athlete, you know, there's like all these there's so many moments where like what's happening, like you're working to like prove yourself to coaches, your teammates, all these external like things, right? And you're also doing that for yourself. You're working to prove things to yourself just as much. Like you got to make sure that like you can actually do that. And when you go to step on the field or do what you need to do, like you're like, I know that I can do this. So this dynamic of like constantly being like, I'm working to prove something. It's very different from being like, man, I'm going to go in, I'm going to work and dive in with an intensity, but to discover. And what that little shift is the difference of competitiveness versus playfulness. And when you work to be like, man, I'm going to work to just like discover and like explore, you're way more playful. And what ends up happening in the state of being, of what would be in the state of like exertion of intention, you're not being aggressive, so you're not as tense. Which means you're much more able to be curious, like in that aware state, as opposed to just focused. And like those just unfold as completely different things. Like completely different things, and completely different ways of seeing things, of experiencing what's going on, and also like how other people experience you is completely different. And that was like a big thing, is I was like, man, I don't want to walk around like thinking I'm like smelling sweet and looking sweet, and I'm like a skunk porcupine. It's just like, you know, and like actually exist in that way and just don't even know it, as I'm like running at people, like pointing at like the things that they should change, you know. It's like, so it's been funny. So like that's been a big like part of the practice. And over the course of like I guess being an entrepreneur, like I've had people that collaborations I've done, I've had people that have worked for me, I've had people I've worked with, and like just learning. Just someone asked me the other day, like, what is my favorite and most important pieces of art that I've made, and I was like, without a doubt, at this point, my relationships. Just realizing that your relationships that you have, like, that's
it's art too.
Yeah, totally. So, Yeah, so it's been fun. It's been a fun transition, I guess,
Yeah,
or
yeah,
practice of going of it all happening. Yeah.
yeah. No, it's just been cool. I don't know. I mean, you become like one of my favorite people to follow in general. Although we're friends and brothers. You mentioned something that actually our last guest, she has a business that's kind of mimicked from this concept. But you mentioned being curious, and her company is curiosity based, and so it's like challenging people to go into that practice of being curious and being playful, and very successful business. But speaking of being curious, like, aside from you playing ball, like I know you probably started around the same age I did, at a young age, or somewhere around there. But um, I'm curious to know, and I think our listeners should also, like, be aware of, like, we've seen you be a professional artist, but at what point did that curiosity like hit your mind or your spirit or your soul where you're like, man, I'm gonna pick up a pen and I'm gonna draw, or I'm gonna pick up, a paintbrush and I'm gonna start painting, and then like I just find it interesting to know what was that initiation like. When at what point did you say I can actually, like, I'm actually good at this, like I actually like doing this, like at what point was that for you?
Hmm. That's a good question. So over the course of my life, I've always had different ways that I'd express myself. There's been times like in college I was doing writing. I got into like photo, video, film stuff. I've
Yeah.
painted, and I think through all that, one thing that has never like led me wrong has been just being honest about what finds me and shows me that I'm interested in it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like this happens, like just being able to, again, like the word relationship, like develop a keen relationship with what activates and draws your attention into being interested and being like, and being
Yeah.
curious about it.
Right.
Um, so that's like the first step of that happening is like just noticing like, oh man, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And then that kind of turns into I guess like, yeah, like a different way of like looking at the world as you go through the day to day, because as you if you think of it as a pie chart, as you're doing more and more of what you're interested in, and less of um, what you feel you're not really deeply engaged in.
Mm-hmm.
Even this part that like, uh, and what I'm getting at from this is like it's about the creation of an intentional lifestyle. Like
Yeah.
that's really what it is.
Yeah.
Um, it's not about saying, "Oh, I want to go. I'm going to try. I want to do this. Oh, can I be good at it?" Because like if we play this out um, fully and say you pick up something that you've never tried and you end up being really really great at it, anything that is ends up having to live in the house of a lifestyle.
Right.
It lives in like your lifestyle and how you make sense of that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it was a pretty pivotal like realization for me when I realized that one of the great gifts that I can allow to happen and also give myself, but it also takes like intentionality and sometimes work and sometimes struggle, is like sculpting out a lifestyle that
Mm-hmm.
is cohesive with the interests and the passions that you've selected to practice.
Right. Right.
And I think that this is something like when anybody's starting something early, it's not considered. I mean, you don't really think about it this way. You're just trying to do
Mm-hmm.
something.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, that's something like I'd encourage people just to consider it as just like, that pie chart where it's just like, okay, if you're just starting out, that's fine. the rest of everything else, the thing you're
Mm-hmm.
selecting to be like, man, I'm interested in that, that's your curious form of play. Everything else becomes, can become a joyful chore to either
Yeah.
get really good at or choose to like not have to do anymore.
Yeah. Right.
Like, and in between that, there's like this sculpting that can begin to happen of sculpting out a lifestyle that,
Mm.
um, that is, yeah, that's cohesive. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, as far as like picking up a paintbrush, and, or anything along the line, I've never had the thought that my goal is just to get good,
Mm-hmm.
because like, what can that even mean?
Right.
Like what can that really outside? So if you take away the competitive wins and losses of like, okay, good means you're winning, or like if you take all that away, it just means you're either learning more, you're learning as you're going
Yeah.
and you're developing, or that's not happening.
Right.
But those things aren't a matter of like good or not.
Right. Right.
And
Right.
even from the standpoint of learning and developing, there's times where like, and I've learned this so much in like in the studio practice, is there's times where like some of the best work is I didn't learn anything from it. I just disappeared and just played and danced and had a great time in the studio, and like something incredible happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I mean,
I've
like,
seen it.
yeah, so even in that, it's like those rules don't necessarily apply. But I think that's
Yeah.
what's cool about other, um, disciplines and areas. Like I really enjoy cooking, right?
Uh-huh.
Like
Yeah.
cooking there's an element of precision and structure to it that, um, is very, black and white. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
did that burn or did that not? Like, is
Right.
this the right texture or is it not?
Yeah.
So, different practices. It's helpful to consider like the parameters and the, um, essences that they have, because that's what they all are. That's what the arts are. They're not
Mm-hmm.
all. They all have like, uh, they activate kind of the same thing in everyone, but all through different ways.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's really helpful to be able, as an artist now, like if I choose to do something, or I'm picking up, like when I started playing keys, I knew that there's a certain way that I'm not going to practice playing the keys. That may be a type of practice that I'll do, um, if I'm sketching or playing with paint. It's like it's not the
Right.
same thing.
Uh-huh.
So, I think at its core, what that begins to really hone in a human being is the ability to learn something accurately that you have not yet done with foresight.
Yeah.
And it's and at that point it becomes very kind of scientific in a way, which is really cool,
Uh-huh.
because you go into what you're doing with like your hypotheses and like how you're going to approach it, and this develops a whole different relationship, which is this what I'm about to say, I think is one of the, big thing, our relationship, our instinctive and natural relationship that activates that whatever energy that is when we come against the discovery that we are wrong about something.
Mm.
Like that right there, this in life is like one of the things that shapes your life greatly in
Yeah.
such a big way. If you're able to reorient that relationship with when you discover that, it's like, oh, all right, cool. Okay. Like I've seen something. Like I've
Yeah.
learned something, instead of being like, ugh. Like the way that plays out is exactly how you could imagine it. Like,
Right. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so I think in the arts, like it's been very cool to see the practice give the gift of that,
Mm-hmm.
because you learn and you see, because in a lot of ways there's no, especially in the studio practice of making visual art, very few there's very few rules, um, once you start playing. Now
Right.
there's um, rules to certain techniques and things, so therefore it makes it that technique. But if you're just playing around, there's really no rules.
Yeah.
But then you start making discoveries of ways that you chose to do it, and your aesthetic says, I don't think that I want to do it that way anymore. And oh wow, here's why. Here's an actual like reason that that's not the move.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you learn to just accept information that shows you that you were wrong about how you went about it in a different way. And I think this is like, I mean, as we grow up, you know, like you're told, like, don't do that. Like, no, that's wrong. This is right.
Yeah.
Do that.
Exactly.
And you're just like bombarded with all this. And there's really not that much space and experience and moments where we get to learn that for ourselves in a way that doesn't feel like it's like punitive.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, I mean, I love what you're saying because like I've always admired, you know, creativity, like putting something into the world, like creating something. It's just been something that I've always been drawn to. And you're putting it in a way to where like it's just all of a process of being playful, but then also, you know, creating a practice. And speaking of that, you know, I want to kind of take this conversation and then kind of get to a certain place with it regarding kind of your style. And like, I know you're a free thinker, and you know, you don't necessarily like you're not someone who just sticks by like, oh, it has to be on this construct. But fortunately and unfortunately, you know, our world is made out of constructs. So it's like the question I wanted to ask is like, how do you take everything that you just said and then turn it into like a style, kind of like you have your own style, you know? And I've seen it be called Pop X. I don't know if you call it that or if that's just something that was kind of picked up from just people just watching your work and seeing your work and receiving your work. But how would you say that you got to that place to say like, okay, this is my genre or this is like my style of art that I'm going to make? Because a lot of what you said just now is so important, but then we live in a world to where things are titled or they have a name to them or, you know, like you have to, you know, when you want to put something on paper, you have to take a thought and then you have to write it down in a form of where it can be received. So like how would you say you went through that process to like find your own style? Like you know, I've noticed over the years that you paint like very iconic, you know, pictures. They are, you know, to iconic figures, iconic animals, iconic, you know, locations, and you have this certain way of like amplifying like what an icon is. Like, how do you think? How would you say you got to that place of like that that being like your groove, like your thing?
Yeah. I great question. I appreciate that question. And I want to point out three distinctions or categories that came to mind as you were saying that. So there's the creative practice that exists as at this point for me, the lifestyle that I have. It could be me washing the dishes. It's the things that how I'm engaged with life. In that, there's periods where I'm in the studio, maybe practicing making visual art.
Yeah.
So there's that. And then there's also all the things that get made that aren't shared, that aren't to be put out and shared,
Yeah.
which is a huge amount of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not for anybody other than just like,
Yeah.
it's not, I wouldn't even say it's for me. It's just rolling in the sandbox, like, and just
Yeah.
like getting to play around and there's marks that get left after that happens.
Yeah.
And then there is what is chose to be shared,
Yeah.
which can't be separated from an element of like also what I'm aware that I'm saying to an audience. And this is something that over the years, like it's like I am aware that I have an audience of people that have kept up with the art and what I'm sharing. Um, my intention has been to do my best to share things that are made in the part that is just me playing around. But as they emerge, they're things that I'm like, oh man, that I vibe with that. That nourishes me.
Yeah.
That nourishes me. So I'm going to share that,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm going to put that out. And over the course of doing that, there's I think like I've come into like a more keen awareness of how I look at subject matter and play with words and and I think that kind of just naturally happens because I'm surrounded by that type of stuff in the studio. Like for me, like if you walked into the studio, that you'd see hundreds of pieces of art, and you'd be like, all these are individual pieces of art, but to me, it's like all the same thing. And when I'm in that environment, that's like the source material that I'm like taking in as I'm in that process of creating, and it's like self-informing in that way. So as far as like actual visual stylistically speaking, I think it's very akin to music in a way that like you may hear a harmony that you may hear five harmonies that are like beautiful, and then there's like one particular one that you're like, I just vibe with this one for some type of reason. You don't know why. That's just what it is. Tools and materials are very much like that. It's like there's some techniques and tools and materials that just like resonate with me because of like what my expression, what like the essence of my expression is. And I think that that's a helpful thing to notice for yourself as an artist, because then you can like build on that. Like I'm not working in techniques that I don't enjoy. Like I'm not going to do that. I'm going to notice like, and not enjoying it doesn't mean that it's difficult or I'm like, oh, I'm not good at it. No, but there are ones that I'm like, oh, this feels like the instrument that's supposed to be in my hands. And you can notice that. So I think it's a combination of, and I think in a way, as I think on this, there's a relationship with being an athlete that helped me probably be able to notice this, because like I said, athlete, it's like you come into an awareness with your playing style, and you don't try to fight with a playing style that like isn't you. Like that, you know what I mean?
Not gonna be a linebacker.
Yeah, exactly. Like you don't do that. Like it's just you'd be like, no, that's not me. I'm not gonna that. So like, I think in a way, like art's very similar. It's very similar in the way that you're discovering like your playing style that is like your expression. And then as you practice that, it becomes less of you having to be aware of that there's tools and materials in your hands that you're working with. And it's almost like though it's like for me at this point, it's like that doesn't even there's no it doesn't feel like I have to pick up a tool for me to like get to the, it's like I can just see it, I can feel what the motion needs to be, and then when it's happening, in a very interesting way, like as it's happening, like I can just let that happen and watch it and also be elsewhere for like that next moment that's happening. And like that sequence of things that happen, I guess that's like the flow of like when like the juice is really flowing, like that's what's happening. It's there's not blockers between what's being said, pure intention, skillfulness and ability with tools and materials, and like activity happening. They can just happen all at the same time.
All at the same time.
Yeah.
That's one thing I've noticed. I've never been able to put it as eloquent as you just did. But that's something that I've always known about you. Like I could see it, and there's your ability to, like you said, you could see what needs to be painted. Like it kind of happens, and I call it that flow. Like it's your flow, and have the ability to kind of tap into that, like so much more often than so many people on the earth, in a way to where like you go to that place in that moment in your head, and
Bro, it's lifestyle. That place in the moment in my head always exists in an environment that's actually there. Like, you hear what I'm saying? Like,
right.
dude, I can't overstate like that. I mean, what you're saying is its own thing, but the environment, man, the environment,
Yeah.
it plays a big part into it. And then also, what's funny is it becomes um a crutch and a handicap at a certain point because you think that you need that, and you
Right,
don't.
right.
So,
Yeah.
and so like very much in real time where I'm at in like my practice is not is letting go of even the idea that there needs to be balance. Like that I need to be like, oh, I need to balance this and this. It's like, no, like let me just allow the
Yeah.
attitude that in the way that I know I would prefer to feel
Yeah.
to be what it is.
Yeah. And
Like,
you mentioned, yeah, you mentioned like allowing, man, and that's so funny because you also said that like you share pieces that feel good to you, like that you are kind of drawn to, like that needs to be shared as opposed to some other art that you may make that never gets shared, like you mentioned. Um, but then you also have this concept that I've always appreciated, like on social media, and just like a practice that you do as far as saying free, and essentially like doing art drops like around the city so people can go like it's like a scavenger hunt almost, where people can go and get free art, man. Like what's your thought behind that? Why do you give away some art for free as far as like other art that's commissioned or that people have to pay for? um, but yeah, let's talk about like that process of like you giving away the free art. Is it marketing? Is it just like a way to give back to community? Is it just part of who you are, just to
yeah.
give? Like
So I
what's
picked
there
up on
about?
like a couple questions there, which are all great. One was the thought and the intention behind like doing the free art drops. You also mentioned you brought up like commission work and like how does that so like essentially the different ways that I think about um, sharing the work and being intentional about like the value that it has, I guess.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so I'll start first with the art drops. Yeah, so I've been doing the art drops. The art drops, like you said, they're like this scavenger hunt experience that happen. Not just in the city now. I mean, I have people that'll help all over the country and the world now. Like they'll if they're going on a trip, like I'd like to do an art drop, and it becomes like, and in that case, it's like it's in the cases of the art drops, it's always been a process of uh practicing would be the word detachment of the idea of ownership over what I make,
Mm, mm, yeah,
and practicing that
yeah.
because like what I noticed early on is in the creative practice one has the tendency to imbue value and meaning on the things that they labor over,
Uh-huh.
or create the idea that this was a certain level of difficulty or has a certain level or type of meaning to it. And it creates a relationship with something that is coming from you that creates the illusion that like you don't have infinite abundance of that.
Yeah, yeah,
That like
yeah,
now
yeah.
it's this thing and like I got to hold on to this thing.
Uh-huh.
And it's a really not helpful way of what, in my opinion, it's not the aesthetic in the way that I would choose to enjoy the adventure of getting to live a life as an artist. Like coveting my own work. Like I just like I'd rather just not worry about that. Like that's not I don't want to do that. So so in the practice of just being of doing the art drops, what it actually did is it created a situation where I became much more mindful of the different techniques and methods and processes of making art than a particular piece of art, which ended up in it unfolding where like I just developed so much more as an artist because I'm not trying to make a painting. I'm trying to create processes and methods that are art themselves in the way that I understand them. So like in my studio space, there's like so many different ways of making art, which ultimately over time has made it where, and this is the difficult thing about when you get to the point of being like, okay, you're making art full time, making it where you're not just having to do the same thing every day.
Exactly.
Like, it's like, it just becomes something else. Like at that point, and it becomes something that is no different than just being like, oh man, I got to go. This is just work I have to do.
Exactly.
And there's times where it is that, but like creating variety within the practice itself allows you to build a relationship with like the emotional spectrum where at any point, if I walk into the studio and I'm like, man, I'm feeling kind of oh, like just kind of like, I know the, the ways of making art that accommodate that emotional state. Like I've designed the studio that way and it's organized that way where I can just be like, okay, well, I'm going to go do this and I can jump into that. Or if I feel like, man, I'm kind of frustrated, it's like, it doesn't like I get to alchemize that in a way that there's an organized way of doing that. So like art drops very much, like started as me being like, you know what, like, if I just sit around looking at all the art that I've made in the studio, only making art that's like that and trying to hold on to the art that's like that, and that's what keeps filling up the studio, it's like, how do I ever progress as an artist?
Exactly. Yeah. Like, it's the reps, the repetition, and going through that process, and inevitably, in my opinion, you're gonna give away art.
Yeah, totally. So then what happens is like, or what has happened is like this realization that there's currency like transfers that like are way more valuable than money.
Exactly.
Like it's just like way more, it's just way more valuable, like to be able to create experiences, and be part of experiences that are, some people's most exciting moments that they've ever had in their life.
Yeah.
And, like it's fun. It's like, it's fun to do that. And to get to do that. And like, from the standpoint of that, it's like, I think, anytime I hear the word marketing, I always feel it from like the way that I hear it from like the times that I'm in. But when I think about it in terms of like, nah, man, I'm like an old time like farmer traveling the land with my goods, like that I've grown in the field, like, that I've taken care with my fruits and my vegetables. And like, I'm going to the market. Like, and I want people to be like, man, look at his fruits and veggies. Oh my gosh. Like, oh my gosh. Thank you so much for bringing these fruits and veggies. It's like, that's the type of marketing that I think that I'm into.
I feel you. I feel you. Yeah. And so, like, I've seen so many of your pieces over the years, and one thing I was curious about, and then we can wrap up after this question, but in my opinion, you're also a writer, and you, you know, oftentimes you would take a piece of writing and then you would make it art. I find that kind of fascinating because I, I I may not know what I'm talking about, but it seems as if it's a different like part of your mind that you need to use to write something like as a writer, and then another creative like side of your brain that is painting, but you've like merged the two in a lot of different ways. Would you say that your process of painting is the same as your writing, or do like you kind of? I've seen you even in Seattle, like you were in a cafe, and you were just writing all day, you know. So I was curious to know if that is a different, process, or if you just found this way of just kind of combining the two in an art form.
That's a great question. The activity of working with a variety of tools and materials in my hands, it generates this experience when you are, I think, skillful enough and knowledgeable enough with enough variety to be considering options. It
Yeah.
shrinks the space of you being able to think about anything else.
Wow.
Like there's nothing else going on than you're completely like engaged.
Yeah. Yeah.
And in that space, as that's happening, the more practice you get with that, the more effortless that becomes. Where, like I said before, it's like I'm not needing to really have to think about that. I can just, and it's also an organized workspace helps where I can visually, me looking at what's there is doing the work. Like, because I'm seeing, I know what all this is. It's like visually I can look and it's organized. And now I can imagine and see, the piece I'm working on and what needs to happen. And while all that's happening, it's like it tunes the ability to listen very sharply to anything that is outside of that happening, which for me, when I'm doing that, I can be intentional about that other bucket or buckets that I put there to like filter through. So if writing is one of those, it's less of me being like, oh, I'm trying to come up with what I'm writing. It's more of like I'm in a state where I'm not having to try to come up with anything, but all these other senses are engaged, but I'm listening.
Yes.
And so a lot of the stuff that like, rarely am I feeling like I'm having to like sculpt a piece of writing. Usually it's just like, okay, and it just is there. So I mean, at this point I have like stacks and stacks of journals, and as I go through those, sometimes like I'll be like, okay, well, how do I, like, what does it mean to maybe like tweak this word into this or change the order of this, and that does mean something. And sometimes how I hear something, I'll share it differently from how I maybe first received it, because like I'm like when I'm sharing a piece of writing, it's different from sharing something that I wrote or maybe received for myself. Because there's always I don't know, it's like what I'm trying to, like when I'm really putting out a piece of writing, and this is the difference between like words and like a visual piece of art. Like a visual piece of art, someone can look at, and if there's not writing on it, it's just colors and imagery, that's a whole different language. It's like it's a visual language. Once there's like an actual language there's like it's out there. What's out there is what's out there. And so there's, I think that, wow, how to say this? I guess what I kind of look for is the ways to make it readable in the most variety of ways, and true in all the ways that it's read, while the whole thing can exist abstractly.
Right. That's a great way to put that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the challenge of that. That's like what as far as like a writing prompt that I use often, that's like what it is. It's like, okay, how do you how do you do that? And then you can read it through that filter and modify it and be like, oh wow. And you discover new things. And in that discovery, it's really cool because it's like you're essentially discovering things about yourself.
Yep. Right.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. Beautifully put, man. And I just wanted to say I appreciate your time, brother. We're going to get out of here. Maybe we can get you back on, in the future, because we didn't get through, Studio AM, some of your partnerships and things you're doing, like directly in Pittsburgh. We didn't even touch any of that.
No, this is fun.
Yeah, this is great, man. So I appreciate you. We'd like to end with one request that I like to have the guests to kind of answer, and it's like an open-ended question, but it's about like how you influence. And so essentially the question is like, can you fill in this statement, speaking of like the fact that our company is called I Influence? Mm-hmm. So can you fill in the statement of I'm Baron Batch and I influence blank? What would that be?
Maybe I'm Baron Batch and I influence easier thinking and simpler living.
I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Seriously though, man, thank you so much. So thank you guys for listening today, episode 7 with the artist himself, Baron Batch. We'll be back with you guys in a couple weeks. Thank you. Take care.